Great. So, welcome everyone. Welcome to Hult Virtual Skills Lab. So, this forum is an online global meeting space offering you the opportunity to skill up and get ahead from home. Connect with like-minded go-getters from all over the globe and hear from world-class Ford professors on the latest topics and trends in life. For those of you who are joining a whole event for the very first time, I would like to give you a little bit of background about us. So Hult have designed a school that looks to the future by focusing on developing your leadership skills and building a global perspective that only first-hand experience can bring. We currently offer one undergrad program, 5 one-year master programs, a global one-year MBA, and a flexible executive MBA. If you would like to get more information on our programs, please visit our website at hult.edu. Today, we are joined by Hult professor Tessa Misiaszek to explore the topic of storytelling your personal brand. But before we begin, I would like to do a little bit of housekeeping. So a recording of the webinar will be sent out to everyone in the next few days, and this masterclass will last approximately 45 minutes, including questions. If you have a question during this session, please write it in the Q&A box, and we will take care of that at the end of the session. We will have approximately 15 to 20 minutes to answer all your questions. And now, without further delay, I would like to hand it over to Professor Tessa.
Thank you so much, Anna. And I am going to go ahead and share my screen so I can pull up my slides.
Perfect.
Okay, and let me just open the slideshow. Excellent. And hopefully, Anna, you can tell me if you see my slides, yeah?
We see it.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you, everyone. And thank you for allowing me to spend some time with you. It's 5 p.m. in Boston, so wherever you are in the world, again, thank you for spending the next hour or so with us, probably a little bit less, talking about storytelling your personal brand. And I'm going to put a question into the chat, which I would love for you all to consider as we open up and as I tell you a little bit more about my background and myself. And that question is, what defines a brand? We all have brands that we love, whether it's our favorite skincare line, our favorite athletic shoe, our favorite food. We all have brands that we love. So what makes a brand? What is a brand? So I want you to consider that question as we open. And just as a quick way of introduction, again, my name is Dr. Tessa Misiaszek. I am going into my 5th academic year teaching at Hult, but I've been teaching in higher education at schools of management in Boston, London, and New York since 2011. I actually came to this space around personal branding, marketing, and brand management, having spent the majority of my professional career in an entrepreneurial capacity. So I've run 3 startups, 2 for-profits, and 1 nonprofit. And I've primarily worked in the healthcare sector. So if you're interested in marketing, if you're interested in entrepreneurship, or if you happen to be in healthcare and are interested in that sector, that industry sector, I will give you my LinkedIn at the end of the presentation. Feel free to link in with me. I'd love to stay connected beyond our time here today. But I really got interested in basically, how does personal branding of founders, and specifically the founders of startups, how does that really influence the overall marketing strategy for a company? And if we think about some entrepreneurial founders like Richard Branson or Steve Jobs, they've had huge influence, their personal brand, over the branding of those companies, which they started and which they founded. And so this became very interesting to me, and then of course, led me to think about my own personal brand. And when we teach brand management, when we work with companies, when I consult with companies around brand management, I have found that a lot of what we do in brand management for products and services really does transfer over beautifully to the way we should be thinking about our own personal brand. So in today's class or webinar, I will be talking about what is a brand. And then we will be talking about how do we translate that into a strategy for a personal brand. Then we will talk about the components of storytelling. What are the most important components as it relates to storytelling your brand? And then we're going to end with a very tactical approach to developing your elevator pitch. So that's what's on tap for the next 30 minutes or so. So coming to that question that I asked you, and I'm not seeing too many answers, so I'd love to get some more thoughts and answers from all of you. If you can go ahead and put them into the chat. What is a brand? How would you define a brand? What is it? What is it? So I appreciate the first comment we got from, and my apologies if I don't pronounce your name correctly, but I think it's Solomon. A brand is something that carries a reputation. It can be a logo, a name, or what people associate with the brand with. It can be both negative and positive feelings. Fantastic. It's all of those things. So when we think about brand identifiers, that's when we think about the brand name, the brand logo, brand, even color palette. Those are all ways that we identify a brand. So you're absolutely right. We think about how do we identify the brand, then comes the reputation of the brand. What do we think of that brand? What are the feelings and the emotional connections that we have with that brand? And certainly it can be both negative and it can be positive as well. So great answer. It's essence. I love that because, you know, the way that we think about defining what a brand is, it's often this kind of intangible thing. It's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. It's the essence of what that company stands for, the emotional associations associated with that particular company. So again, the word emotions, uniqueness. Yes, brands have to be unique. They have to differentiate themselves. And it really becomes the way that they differentiate and show their uniqueness as it relates to the competitive landscape in which they're playing. I think it's the way that you're seen by others and what you do, that no one else can do the same. Again, that differentiation piece. Identity, authenticity. Ooh, love that word. We're going to talk about authenticity in a moment. Meaning and purpose, absolutely. Core values. Great answer. Who said core values? I think it's Karen or Kieran. Core values, absolutely. We're going to talk about the importance of establishing your core values before you even start your brand strategy. Passion, love, emotions a company puts into a product or service. Absolutely love that. A brand should be reflective of what you're passionate about, whether you're talking about your product or service or whether you're talking about your own personal brand. So these are really great responses. And as I said, you know, when we think about what is a brand, it really is the way that we identify not just a particular product or service, but the emotional associations and the identifiers that come to mind, the imagery that comes to mind when we think about a particular company. So when you think about some iconic brands like Coca-Cola, or McDonald's or Nike, right? Certain imagery comes to mind. And what's important to realize is that companies shape that. It's not like it happens by circumstance. It's not like it happens by accident. You don't want it to. You want to be able to shape that and create a strategy around making sure that the imagery that comes in the minds of consumers when they see your brand identifier, like your logo or your name, then you have control over what are those images that come into the mind of the consumer. The next question here is around, you know, how do brands gain equity? And when we think about equity, I usually try to define it as the real estate in the mind of the consumer. How ingrained is that brand into our minds? How memorable is that brand? And again, iconic brands that have been around for many decades who really have this kind of intergenerational connection will obviously have a lot more brand equity than newer brands, but certainly there's new brands that, you know, have come out in the past 5 years, products, services, apps that we use that have tremendous brand equity already, and it's because of the impact that they make. Perhaps they were a huge disruptor in their particular industry or their particular category. And they really disrupted the way business was done, and they redefined the business, and they're really innovative, and therefore they create this, again, this memorable, lasting image in the minds of the consumers, and that is brand equity. And so as we think about just the concept of what is a brand and how do we establish brand equity, I want you to continue to think about those definitions as we move into talking about your personal brand, because it all very much transfers over, whether we're talking about a product or service or whether we're talking about ourselves. Our personal brand is something that we want to have a strategy for. It's something that we want to have control over. We certainly want to help craft the imagery that comes to people's minds when they think about us. And we want to be memorable, that we want to differentiate ourselves from all the other competition that we might be, up against as it relates to getting a job or getting into graduate school or whatever goal that we might have for ourselves. And so that's really what we're going to speak about today. And why this is also so important is because when we think about the job market, 85% of US recruiters say a candidate's online reputation influences their hiring decisions. And as someone who has sat in a COO and a CEO role myself and has done lots of hiring in the past, I will tell you 100% of the time, I would say in the last 10 years, I have Googled candidates. And I think that's really natural for recruiters to essentially Google a candidate's name to see what comes up. And I would say 50% of the time you're really looking for, is there anything really differentiating? Do they have a strong profile? Do they have a blog? Does their LinkedIn profile reflect what's in their CV, or are there a lot of discrepancies? And then the other half of the time, as an employer, you're really making sure that this prospective candidate doesn't have any, skeletons in the closet, doesn't have anything crazy going on social media. Culturally, do you think there will be a good fit within the company as well? So again, when you think about, okay, if I Google my name, what's going to pop up? That's reflective of your personal brand. So the more that you have a strategy and that you're intentional around these, the type of imagery, the photos, the types of articles and stories that might be out there about you, the more control and strategy that you put around that and intention around that, the more it's going to reflect that which you want people to see about your own personal brand and your own level of professionalism as well. So when we think about how do we translate our personal brand, how do we really start to think about, kind of branding in general and translating that into a personal brand? There's two factors that's really important. First of all, we want to think about what space are we playing in? Where do we want to develop this level of influence with our personal brand? And so when I say where, you want to think about, what is my goal? Do I have an industry context? Am I trying to break into a particular industry like healthcare? Or is there a particular discipline that I'm really interested, like analytics or marketing or finance, or, I want to work for a hedge fund someday? What is the space in which I want to operate and work in? And so having that context is really important when you think about the type of content you need to create, the way you need to present yourself, the type of ways in which you're going to connect with influential people in that particular market or that particular network. And also thinking about the channels in which you're able to connect with people to be able to reach your goal, to be able to establish yourself in that particular context, in that space. And then you also want to think about who is it that I'm targeting? Who's my audience? So just like we would do in marketing with a brand strategy and thinking about who is our target customer, who is our target market that we're going after, because again, today, unlike decades ago when we used to do marketing through mass media channels, TV, print, radio, we used to put out broad messaging and hoping that, our message would stick with one or two people. Today, through digital channels, we can be much more targeted with our content because we have the ability to do lots of research and to pull lots of data and to know exactly who we're targeting, what will resonate with them, what is relevant content to that particular person, and really be able to craft our message towards that target audience. We can do the same thing for our personal brand. And so we want to think in advance, who is it that we're trying to reach with our personal brand? Who is it that we're trying to influence? Who is it that we're trying to reach with our content? So thinking about where and who is really the way that you start to translate your strategy, your brand strategy, toward your personal brand strategy. And then just like you would do for your brand strategy, you want to think about, the fact that the way that you would create a strategy for a product or a services brand, you want to take those same steps to create your own personal brand strategy. So let's kind of walk through what you see here on this slide. So we saw core values, and my apologies, I'm trying to think who said core values. Kieran said core values, and absolutely positively, you want to establish for yourself what are your core values. Now, core values is a concept that has, been around for decades and decades. One of my second job out of undergrad was actually with Johnson & Johnson. And Johnson & Johnson had the Johnson & Johnson Credo, which is essentially this, I think, 3 to 4 paragraph mission statement that as an employee, I had to memorize in the first 2 to 3 days that I was on the job. And it essentially said, was this guiding statement that helped guide Johnson & Johnson in their business decision-making. And it really stated that first comes the customer, second comes the organization, employees, third comes the shareholder. So profit comes last. In the priority of making sure people are safe and making business decisions, that's what guides Johnson & Johnson's decision making. Core values as a concept has evolved over time, and I would say about 12, 13, 14 years ago, Tony Hsieh, CEO of Zappos, was pretty revolutionary in the way that he put his company's core values really as the centerpiece of their entire marketing strategy, realizing that if you developed a culture of fun within your organization and had happy employees, that had a direct correlation with customer service and customer satisfaction. And so, he created these, I think there's 7 or 8 core values. He created videos about them and all sorts of things. And that was really reflective of who the company was and who Tony Hsieh was as a CEO and the type of culture that he wanted to cultivate. And so just as we would do with startups, I would advise with a startup about thinking about what are your core values and really thinking about this at the outset of the company so that, again, your decision making can be guided by these values moving forward. I would really stress that this is a great way to differentiate your own personal brand and yourself from the competition, and really being careful to think about what are the values that really guide me in my own career and in my own decision making, and what do I value. And these can be anything from honesty, integrity, trustworthiness, to being able to work in a collaborative environment, to having a particular interest like human rights or environment or sustainability. And so again, and being able to establish your core values up front will not just help guide you in your career decision making, but will help guide the content and really start to shape what your personal brand looks like and be very reflective of who you are as a person. So values is very important. Second is target market. So again, keeping in mind of who am I trying to reach? Again, you don't want to be so broad. You don't want to try to boil the ocean in who you're trying to reach in your personal brand. You're not trying to reach the whole world's population, but you're really trying to reach, influential people who can help you reach your career goals. And so again, the more that you can be specific around industry or discipline or category or something along those lines, the type of work that you want to do, the type of organization you want to work with, keeping in mind who it is that you're trying to really connect with, will again help you to develop relevant content for that particular target market. The third component is to create metrics that will help you measure the success of your goals. So if you take my marketing class, we will talk about SMART goals. And I want you to think about SMART goals in the context of your personal brand as well. So SMART meaning specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound, right? SMART goals. So being specific about what those goals are, and again, who are you targeting with these with your brand? making them measurable, putting in real metrics that you can measure and measure your success of your strategy. Being sure that these are attainable, not creating such a lofty goal that you won't be able to attain that goal. Making sure it's relevant. So again, you know, a lot of you are going to be creating a digital profile and on digital channels like social media, whether it's LinkedIn or Instagram or TikTok or Facebook, whatever that might be. You might be creating your own blog, your own web page. But, you know, making sure that it's whatever platform you're on, that it's relevant again for what your goals are and who the target audience is. And then again, setting a time that you're going to measure your goals. So whether it's monthly, every 3 months, every, you know, 6 months, but being sure that you can, you know, set a time limit to how you're going to measure your success of your strategy, and then knowing whether or not you have to pivot or perhaps even broaden the scope or narrow the scope of who it is that you're trying to target. And then the last piece is storytelling your brand. So really being able to connect with your target market through storytelling. So for thousands and thousands of years, humans have been telling stories. We are wired for storytelling. And so again, I'm going to talk in a moment about, you know, how can you think about your own experiences and start to craft those stories. But it's really important to think about, you know, not just kind of putting messages out there and pushing content, but to actually create intrigue and storytelling that will invite people in, that will get them hooked, that will want them to hear and listen more to what you have to say, because, you know, you have such effective storytelling. So we're going to talk in a moment a little bit more about that. So I just want to take a pause here because I see some questions coming in the chat. So one is a question around what platforms do we look at most when we search for people when you're an employer? That's a great question. I will say that I think LinkedIn is an incredible platform as it relates to job recruiting. I have always been incredibly impressed with LinkedIn. Their algorithm is phenomenal. If you have a profile with a lot of great keywords in it, that will match up to job descriptions of your dream job, you will get matched through their algorithm. I know as an employer, whenever I created job postings, it was amazing to me, the candidates that would get, you know, that would be applying to the position, that would be suggested to apply to the position by the LinkedIn algorithm. And they were a perfect match. And I've always had lots of success recruiting through LinkedIn. So I think LinkedIn is a really prominent one in a very professional setting. I also think Instagram is phenomenal. I think there's lots of storytelling that happens on Instagram. I think you can have a very professional profile on Instagram as well. I think TikTok is on the rise. I think if you have an influence or if you have an interest in becoming an influencer, whether it's in a B2C context, a business to consumer context, or even if it's in a knowledge sharing business to business context or an industry context, TikTok is on the rise. And believe it or not, I think some amazing storytelling happens on TikTok. I'm actually a fan of TikTok myself. Dear professor, and as a recruiter, does the fact that a candidate has no social media presence for privacy reasons play against offering the candidate the job? I would say that it wouldn't play against you. I mean, certainly if you have no social media presence, but I would consider a professional profile on LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn is a very, you know, it's a great platform that allows you that if you are working in a business context, I think a lot of employers would expect to see you on LinkedIn. I think they see that as an asset when someone has a really strong LinkedIn profile, because they want employees that have, you know, that are influential themselves and then can help promote the company. So I can understand, you know, certain reasons why people would not want to be on social media, but if LinkedIn, if you would consider that, I think that is a great platform to be part of. And I'll do one more question before I move forward. You can make sort of a persona, just like marketing, just be a little bit more clear. Julia, I think it's interesting you bring up the word persona, because I'm actually going to talk about that in a moment. Because I think, yes, just like marketing, we think about who our target customer is, and we create personas of who that person is. And certainly in the context of who it is that we're targeting, it's really important to think as detailed as we can about who that person is, so that we can really think about, you know, how can I bring value to that person? What are their challenges? And how can I, you know, create a meaningful relationship with that person that I would like to connect with? Oh, good, Julie, I'm glad that I'm getting it. What I don't want that to be confused with is you creating your own persona, because what's really important to personal branding is that you think about representing yourself authentically. Sorry about that, but having authenticity and representing yourself, to not try to create a persona that isn't reflective of who you truly are. I think that is something that can be really dangerous as it relates to people put out there what they think people want to see. And while, you know, you want to gain knowledge and, you know, especially I get this question a lot, what if I want to pivot into a new industry and I don't know a lot about that industry? Like, how do I demonstrate that I want to be in this industry? You know, don't fake it. I always tell people, if you have interest in a new industry, then go out on a listening tour, you know, set up 10 informational Zoom meetings where you just listen to someone for 15, 30 minutes about their role and their job and what they do, and how does that play into the larger context of the industry or if the particular company, and just learn and be in a learning mode and listen. People love talking about themselves. So, you know, again, what you always want to be sure you do is authentically represent your experiences and what you've done. And if you want to move into a new direction, that's fantastic. Again, be open and sit back and say, okay, I've got to learn. I've got to put my learning mindset in place and listen. And then you'll start to see these little openings for how you can bring relevant skill sets, or even be able to translate certain experiences into that new industry context. But what's most important is just being really authentic in the way that you put together your personal brand. That's why I talk about values at the outset, thinking about those values and what's important to you, and then authentically representing that. There is no right answer for what the value should be. When you look at a core values for a company, I think it's upwards of 85% of companies have the same core values of, I think it's integrity, honesty, and teamwork. That's not very differentiating. If you have the same core values as every other company out there, that's not a differentiator. So it's good to think, okay, what's important to me? And it's okay if that's different from other candidates for the same job, or if that's different from other people you know. It's what makes you different. And that's really your value proposition. That's what you're bringing different to the job and to the role. And then the other important piece to this is consistency. So again, it's so much easier to be consistent in your message and the way that you represent yourself when you're true to yourself. If you try to, again, put out this air of confidence about a topic or a discipline or an industry, and you're not actually, you know, you don't have that much experience, or you're not as knowledgeable as you think you are, and then you kind of put yourself out there in a different way, it's going to be hard to keep that up. And the last thing you want to do is falter on who it is that how you're representing yourself. Because if people don't believe you, or if they see that you don't know as much as you say you do, they won't trust you moving forward. So again, authentically representing yourself, and then being consistent in that messaging and in that content is really important. So again, it begins with this real self-reflection of who am I, and knowing thyself first. I always tell students who are about to go for a job interview, the most important thing you can do before a job interview is be reflective of your own experiences and the opportunities that you've had and the skills that you've acquired, and then really think about how would you translate those skills into that new industry context or into that new job context. But knowing yourself is probably the most important way that you can prepare for any interview. Because again, to be able to storytell around these experiences, to demonstrate that you've acquired these skills, through your experience is incredibly important in that context. And so to one, how do we differentiate from other brands? This is exactly how you do it. You have to go through the reflective exercise of really thinking about your story, what makes you unique. We've all had different life experiences that have brought us to this particular moment in time. And so, you know, what are the stories and experiences that I've had that have make me different? What are my perspectives? What kind of expertise can I share? If you've been lucky enough to journal over your life, and you can go back and reflect on those journals, fantastic. If not, take some time to really reflect on those experiences through childhood, through your, you know, primary and secondary schooling, through your undergraduate degree and postgraduate. But think about those perspectives and experiences and write them down. And don't just write down, you know, I went to graduate school or I went to undergraduate and I majored in this. Think about the stories that come with those experiences, and how would you describe that story in 2 minutes? Maybe even write out the story so that you can leverage that when you have the opportunity to, whether you're networking or in an interview. And then another tool that we use in marketing that's really very helpful and really helps to, you know, perform this level of analysis is what we call a SWOT analysis. So some of you who are business majors might know what SWOT is already. It's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, SWOT. And just like we do it if we're looking at a product or service and expanding into a new market, we would have performed this analysis on ourselves. So how do we do that? Well, first of all, we look at our own strengths and weaknesses internally, right? What do we know about ourselves? What are our strengths and what are our weaknesses, or the challenges that we face? What are things that we love to do and what are things that we hate to do? And another way that you can do this is you can ask friends and family, hey, what do you think I'm good at? When you think about me, what qualities come to mind? A lot of times that's a very illuminating exercise to get what your friends and family think of you. They probably will. First of all, I've always found that there's common themes between what my friends and family think of me, but oftentimes it's not the way that you think of yourself. So getting that other perspective from people very close to you in your life is also very helpful. So strengths, weaknesses, identify what those are. Again, those are internal. And just like we would do a SWOT analysis with a product or service, we look at, again, what's happening in our external environment. So opportunities, what are market trends happening? You know, what are some of the hot job markets? What are some industries that I want to connect with that would, you know, provide some great opportunities? And what are some threats to my success in my career? A global pandemic is a legitimate threat, right? Economies, you know, starting to trend downward in particular country markets, whatever that might be. You want to be aware of those issues. You don't want to hide from them. You don't want to ignore them. You want them front and center so that, again, you can develop a strategy for your personal brand that will help you navigate some of those challenging waters. And then you know, kind of take all of that analysis and start to say, okay, so what is my unique differentiator? What makes me different from my competition, you know, other undergraduate or postgraduate or MBA or executive vice presidents in a particular industry? What makes me different? What are the experiences I've had? What are the skills that I have? What perspective do I have that really truly makes me stand out against, you know, the competitive landscape? And that is what we call your value proposition. And you want that to be very well defined in just a short statement, what really makes you unique and allows you to stand out. So that's really, you know, a lot of the analysis that goes in. It's interesting when I talk to people about personal brand, oftentimes when you think about personal brand, people will think about, sorry, my doorbell just rang. People will think about, you know, how do I message on social media, or how do I, you know, create a profile online? But if you don't do this strong part of the analysis first, you won't get the content right, or you won't know who to target. So again, being able to really go through this level of self-reflection and analysis is very important to this process. And so just this last piece that I'm going to end with is a very tactical approach that you want to think about as it relates to, you know, if you have that opportunity to connect with someone offline. You know, again, when we think about personal brand, we're kind of in this world of social media and digital platforms, but being able to also connect with people offline is very important. And so these are 5 steps that I always suggest for what we call an elevator pitch. And when I say elevator pitch, the way we define an elevator pitch is if you had 30 or 60 seconds in an elevator with someone that you've been dying to meet or that's hugely influential in your field, what would you say? How would you introduce yourself? How would you gain their attention? What would you ask for in that moment? And so again, don't leave this to chance. Think about this, you know, spend an hour or two kind of crafting out what would you say at a networking event. If you go to a careers fair, recruiters meet 300 candidates that all have very similar profiles to you. How would you stand out in your introduction? And so again, you want to think about what would be your goal with making this pitch. Again, if you had the opportunity, you know, who are those people that you would love to meet, to network with, and how could you craft the pitch so that you could be memorable and offer just a nugget of information that's valuable to them in that moment. And then you want to think about how to, again, be memorable and wow them with your opening. So I will tell you right now, 99% of the population introduces themselves the exact same way. They say, "Hi, my name is Tess. I live in Boston and I am a professor." They say what their name is, they say where they're from, and they say what they do. And everyone introduces themselves that way. It's very natural to do that. We don't know what else to say, right? So we just state the demographic information that we have about ourselves. And that's the way we usually introduce ourselves. But I want you to get creative. I want you to think about how could I ask a question right out of the gate? Could I say something about where I'm from? Could I create a little bit of intrigue that would just get them thinking like, oh, that's kind of interesting. I want to learn more. And so just trying to open with something other than who you are, where you're from, and what you do can really be helpful. So an example is that I use often is that I will say I am a storytelling professor. And in the world of academia and higher education, that there isn't such a thing. Or people are usually like, well, are you a real professor? Do you work at a college? What's a storytelling professor? Do you work at a preschool? What is that, right? It sounds strange in my world of academia. And so it allows me to explain what that is and what I value and my approach to marketing and my approach to teaching students. And how I work with students to draw out their stories and to leverage those stories for their own personal brand. So again, it's being able to say something a little bit interesting, a little bit intriguing, so that you get that person saying, oh, I want to learn more. That sounds really interesting. I've never heard that before, right? And to want them to continue the conversation. And then be sure to end your elevator pitch with an ask. Don't let it die. Don't say, okay, it was great to meet you, bye. You want to be able to continue the conversation. So again, you know, can I have a cup of coffee? Would you mind if could I get your business card so I could contact you and have a follow-up call? I'd love to learn more about your role. I'd love to learn more about your career path and how you were able to achieve this role with this company. You know, I hope to be where you are someday. I would love to learn how you got there. Whatever that might be, but try to have a call to action, a next step that would allow you to stay connected with this person to further develop the relationship. So something very tactical that you can take away and hopefully work on that's a little bit more offline than online. But again, just as important, because we will all eventually be out of quarantine, be networking again, and as we meet, you know, people in interviews and so forth, it's important to think about that first impression that we can make with folks, and that we want to be memorable and we want them to want to learn more about us. And so thinking about how we introduce ourselves is really important to that process. So I'm sure that you have lots of questions. So I'm going to go ahead and end there. And my LinkedIn is here on this slide, as well as my email. So I'm going to hand it back over to Anna. I'm happy to take your questions at this time. Thank you very much for your attention. It's been a real pleasure to be able to present this information to you.
Thank you so much, Professor. That was an amazing presentation, and I'm sure everybody agrees with me. So as you heard, Professor Tessa, she's open to questions. So if you would like to pop them in the Q&A box, we can take care of that on a case-to-case basis. So we have one already, Professor, from Charlene. And she's asking, what is your elevator pitch?
I get that a lot. It actually, it's funny because it actually changes over time, but in an academic context, you know, I'm hesitant. It's funny, this question came up. I'm hesitant to give you my elevator pitch because I don't want it to stem your creativity, right? Because when you hear other people's pitches, you kind of start to think, okay, that's the map for the way I should, you know, put content together and form my own pitch. But I think what's really helpful, so again, my opening is that I'm a storytelling professor, and then I try to relate that to my role, whether it's as a marketing professor, whether that's as an entrepreneur, or whether that's as a storytelling business communications, you know, consultant. So I have different contexts in which I leverage that kind of intriguing opening. And then, and then, you know, you kind of work it from there. Using metaphors is a really great way to kind of explain, you know, a quality about yourself or a skill that you might have, or the way that you would differentiate yourself is using a metaphor. And then, you know, storytelling, being able to tell an experience that really does differentiate you, whether you're someone who's lived in multiple cities around the world, whether you're, you know, you have an interest in a particular field because of an experience you've had, whatever that is, it's going to be very unique and different to everyone. And so just taking the time to kind of think through those questions, you'll be able to craft your own elevator pitch.
Thank you so much for that answer, Professor. It was really insightful. And yeah, I remember when we had to do the elevator pitch. So if you guys have more questions, please feel free to pop them up and we can take care of those. We have one more question coming up. This is more general, I believe. So if one doesn't have a particular or a specific field chosen, how can we define a target market? Any tips?
Yeah, that's really interesting. So if you don't have a specific field chosen, again, I would lead with core values. So if you have, I do an exercise called the passion inventory with my undergraduate students. And when you think about the word passion, right, we automatically think about things we love to do, right? I love yoga, I love to run, I love to sail, I love sport. Whatever it is that we love to do, that is our passion. But I would really like you to think about the word passion differently, and not necessarily that which you love to do, but that which is very motivating for you, to do. Is there a particular problem that you're really motivated to solve? And so we talk about what we call triggers. Is it negative or positive triggers that really drive you to be motivated to address a particular problem, or is it a positive trigger because it's, again, something that you love to do, it's an activity that you love to do and you want to spend your life in that space? And you think about what are the thoughts that get triggered, the emotions that get triggered, and the behaviors that get triggered. And so when you go through this kind of self-reflection of thinking about what you value, what your values are, and then also what are the things that really trigger you, that motivate you? Maybe it's politics, maybe it's the environment, maybe it's healthcare, maybe it's, inequities that are happening within, our social justice system, whatever it might be. Then you can start to say, oh, these are things that really trigger me. And that will start to steer you in a direction of people that have similar interests and that might be like-minded, that might be influential in those fields that you might want to connect with. So I do say to students, if you're still like, I have no idea what I want to do, starting to just, again, go through the self-reflective, you probably are more focused than you think you are. And so even if you start to connect with people who have similar triggers, whether it's positive or negative, the ways in which they're motivated, topics that they're motivated by, and you're able to start making those types of connections and thinking about, okay, what's content that's relevant to those people, that's your target market. At least it'll start to help guide you in this process, and then you can evolve it from there. And if you decide to pivot to a different industry or something new, that's fine. You can certainly evolve over time. But I would certainly think of it from that perspective. And again, I think the self-reflection is a necessary first step before you start creating content and connecting with other people.
Thank you, Professor. I think that was a great answer. Another question that we have is basically, is the main aim or like objective of a personal brand to be remembered?
I think I think you will be remembered. I think it's to bring value. I think the main objective of a personal brand is to bring value to others. And the reason I say that is a lot of personal brands that you'll see out there are led by ego. And what do I mean by that? It's people putting everything wonderful about their life out there. You know, they're incredibly confident. They throw out all of these, you know, their accolades and their certificates and their diplomas and their achievements. And it's a listing of everything that they've accomplished. But it doesn't really say anything about who they are as a person. It doesn't say what value they're going to bring to other people. It doesn't say how they're going to help a company or how they're going to, you know, address a particular challenge or an issue or solve a problem. So I think that the goal of your personal brand should really be about service and not ego. And how can you bring value to other people? Because that's what people connect with. That's what people are interested in. And if you think about, it's not just about putting out all my achievements so someone's really impressed by me, so then they're going to want to connect with me. It's really about how can I be of service so that someone's going to see that I can be useful, and they're going to want to authentically connect with me so that I can help them in their role, or I can help them with their company and hopefully get a job. So I think it's really more about, and then I think you'll be remembered. I think you'll be memorable. So I think that your personal brand is really about what value do you bring? What is your value proposition? And how can you be of service to others?
Thank you, Professor. Laura is asking if you could please recommend them some literature or like bibliography, like some books or like content that you think it's relevant to learn more about the personal brand.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because a lot of what I've developed about personal branding strategy, I've developed from brand strategy as a whole. So if you're interested in brand strategy, I think Denise Leome is amazing. She's out of Stanford. She does a lot around values-based brand strategy, and I've adopted a lot of her work and thought about it in the context of a personal brand. You know, there's a lot of great TED Talks out there that are around personal brand. Talia Waller is one that I recently saw that I think she's out of Philadelphia. She's got a great TED Talk on personal branding. Again, I would be looking for literature as it relates to values-based branding. I think that that's really important. That's certainly the approach that I take as it relates to personal brands. Oh, one more, Simon Sinek, Start With Why. He's great. Great leaders inspire action. Anna, you took my marketing class. I think we might have seen that.
Yeah.
That TED Talk. It's a favorite. It's a classic. By this time, I think it's 14 years old. But Simon Sinek, Great Leaders Inspire Action, is a great 20 minutes worth of a TED Talk.
Perfect. Let me see. We have another one. What do you think is the most challenging situation when you're trying to connect with people? Like, what is like the biggest challenge to reach out?
Yeah, again, I think that oftentimes what's challenging for people is that they think that they have to be kind of in this proving mode versus in a listening and a receptive mode. So when you think about personal branding, you're kind of thinking about how do I put myself out there? And then when you're meeting someone, you're kind of like, how can I impress this person? And I think that's a natural tendency that we all have. And so I think that it's more advantageous to try to be receptive and then look for openings to provide value, authentic openings to provide value. And so again, I think, you know, if you ever took a sales course with me, you would know that listening is far more important than talking in sales. I think that that's true of most sales courses these days, because you really want to listen for what that person's, you know, what their challenges are, what their issues are, how can you bring value and help solve the problem for them, you know, listen for those objections, I should say, you know, and then think about, okay, how can I overcome those objections? I think the same is true for personal brands. So again, being more receptive, don't feel like you're in this kind of, I have to prove myself, but to be able to kind of try to have a conversation and a discussion. Think about what are 2 or 3 questions that you can always be armed with to ask other people to learn more about them, and then let the discussion and conversation evolve organically. I think that would be really, really helpful.
Perfect. The next one is about personal brand as well. So do you have any examples of someone that has like a good personal brand, somebody that you could like call on or like highlight?
Oh gosh, I think there's so many, and I think it's there's so many different contexts in which people put out their great personal brands. And you can also look at, again, I would measure the success of a personal brand. How are they of service to other people, and but also what is their level of influence? You can say the influence could be positive or negative, and I think that oftentimes is just, it might be cultural, it might be a matter of opinion. So I'm not going to say, I mean, there's a lot of strong personal brands out there, and I don't know if I agree with, you know, the value systems of all of them. So it's hard for me to say this is a great one or that is not a great one. Certainly, okay, I'm going to pick one that everyone will know, Oprah Winfrey. She's a safe one. But again, I think the way that she has approached her entire life and her brand has been through service. And creating content that really allows people to have empathy, and that she's used the tool, the mechanism of empathy to really, you know, bring storytelling to life, to bring people's stories to life, to allow people to really, you know, sit in the shoes of other people, to be able to relate to other people. And then to really capitalize on that and cultivate that into really, I think, one of the most impenetrable personal brands probably out there of anyone. So I mean, she comes to mind, and she's an obvious one, but there's a lot of strong brands out there that are both negative and positive. Again, there's influencers that have been incredibly successful on YouTube and other media platforms, because, you know, they have made an offering to their audience, they've created trust with their audience, and then they're able to capitalize on that level of influence. And so whether you're talking about Oprah Winfrey or whether you're talking about PewDiePie, I mean, I think that they're completely different, but successful in their own right.
Thank you so much for that answer, Professor. And I think this could be the last one. So Jimena, she has a question. What would be the #1 thing you would recommend to someone who wants to start their own brand?
Yeah, so I guess that, gosh, I wish I could ask a question back, because I'm kind of wondering if you want to start your own brand for a product or a service. Is that what it is?
I think it's more like a personal brand, she says.
Yeah, so I mean, if it's a personal brand, I'd say follow a lot of what we talked about today. So it's really about self-reflection in the process that we discussed today. I think if you want to kind of create a brand and really leverage your personal brand as part of that brand. So kind of like a founder might do, if you're a blogger, if you're an influencer of some sort, again, in all of these realms, you're thinking about, how do I bring value to my audience, my target audience, right? So if you look at the way influencers become successful, they find a niche, they become expert in that particular niche, and they develop trust with their audience. They really make themselves vulnerable and put themselves out there. They're consistent with the amount of times that they're posting and the content and the value that they're giving to their audience, which allows the audience to want to come back again and again to hear what they have to say. And so if you're, again, it's difficult for me to answer this question because I don't know the context in which they're asking it, but you know, I think it's around that authenticity, being able to develop that level of expertise and bringing that value to your target audience, and then being consistent in your messaging and the way that you're connecting with your audience so that they can trust your messaging and that they see that intrinsic value that you're bringing to them probably on a daily or a weekly basis. So that's probably the best way I can answer that question without really knowing the context. But
I think that was great advice, honestly. You know, being consistent, know your audience, and actually bring value to them. Okay, I think we have time for one more. So,
okay.
Luca, he's asking about the importance of values. Do you think that's a modern tendency? He's saying that, you know, he doesn't remember his grandma talking about the green values or brand or something like that past, you know, like in some years before.
So yeah, so I will say, I think that it is a more modern tendency, but I think it's because if you look at research right now on consumer behavior of younger generations, we're going through a generational shift right now with consumer power. Gen Z is coming into the marketplace and they're incredibly powerful. They have incredible consumer power, and their consumer behavior is driven by values. They have a higher standard for companies. They want to support and really they see companies, brands as representative of their own personal brand. So when they carry a Mac, it says something about themselves. When they wear Supreme sweatshirts, it says something about who they are. If they're wearing a particular, you know, Nikes or Adidas, it says who they are. It says something about themselves. And so when we look at the kind of shift in the generational consumer behavior, younger generations care about values. And I do think that that's different than my generation, Gen X, where we were really targeted through mass marketing, TV, radio, and print. And you know, there were these kind of big companies and iconic brands, but now through digital channels, there's such an opportunity for smaller brands to really be what we call challenger brands and to kind of break through and to really connect more authentically with audiences, and to really do that in a way that says, hey, you know, buy my shoes because I give away a pair of shoes to a developing country for every pair of shoes that you buy. And when you wear Tom's shoes, it says something about what your value system is because you support a company like mine. So I think we're seeing that these value systems coming into the play of the actual business model and business strategy of younger companies. And I think it's here to stay. I don't think that this is a phenomenon that's passing or a trend. I think we have higher expectations on companies doing the right thing for the environment, for sustainability, for human rights. And I think younger generations of consumers are much more savvy about how to hold companies accountable to essentially have this level of behavior and to sustain this level of business practice. It's important to the consumer. So yes, I think it's more modern, but it's, you know, as I mentioned, Johnson & Johnson's had the Johnson & Johnson credo, I think, for 50, 60 years. So it's something that was established, but I do think it's becoming much more centric into business strategy today.
Thank you, Professor. That was an amazing answer as well. And yeah, I believe you're right. It will depend of the audience. Like you're saying, Gen Z they're more, for them it's more relevant, you know, to see that the company that they're supporting is doing good to the world and good to humanity. So yeah.
Yes. And they have access to information, so they can hold companies accountable. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah, that's why most of them are developing social responsibility programs and so on. Well, I think this has been all for us. I want to, I'm going to share my screen just for a minute so I can show them when it's going to be our next webinar. But before we do that, I would like to thank you again, Professor Tessa, for your amazing presentation. It has been really insightful. we are going to have a new session of Virtual Skills Lab on November the 3rd with Professor Rob Anthony on leadership in crisis, if you all would like to attend. As I said before, I'm going to send you a recording of the webinar so you can refer to Professor Tessa's class whenever you want to. I know that some of you were asking that question in the chat box, so don't worry, you will get it. And well, this has been all from us. We hope that you enjoyed this session, and we were really, really happy to have you today.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Link in with me. Look forward to connecting.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.